In 1897, a young woman and 4 of her classmates decided to sew themselves some matching dresses for their commemorative graduation photo. One of these young women, Alice, wrote later in her biography, "We girls were doubtless as poor a bunch as ever finished a college course. At least, if they weren't all poor, they cooperated nobly in an effort to make our graduating outfit as inexpensive as possible, without sacrificing good taste. We secured a bolt of dimity, pretty daintily flowered dimity, and lace for collars and ribbons for belts. One pattern, with a little adjustment, served for us all. By making them ourselves, our dresses cost us 73 cents apiece, and they were pretty too." The memories of those days, spent sewing together in one of the rooms of dear old South Hall, are more to be treasured than much more elaborate dresses ever could have been. 82 years later, Alice's granddaughter Rilla wore this dress as she walked down the aisle at her wedding. The dress had required some small repairs, and the lace needed to be replaced, but beyond that it was still in very good condition, and she looked absolutely lovely. 46 years later, Rilla's great-niece saw this dress for the first time at Christmas, and absolutely fell in love. This month I will be introducing you to this beautiful dimity gown made by my great-great-grandmother, and my plans for creating a replica of this absolutely beautiful little dress. When I saw this dress a few months ago at Christmas, I was so excited to see it. While it was yellowed and quite creased from not having been handled in several years, I immediately could tell that it was absolutely beautiful. I took several measurements, analyzing it as carefully as I could while being as gentle as possible. Over the next few months, I scoured every fabric store that I could to try to find a fabric that was similar. Nowadays, dimity seems to be very difficult to find, and this particular dimity wasn't just white, it had these tiny little pink rosebuds with little green leaves around them, and I wanted something that was at least similar. My first initial thought was just to use some sort of floral quilting cotton, but I couldn't be sure that it would be lightweight enough. Part of the magic of this particular dress is the incredibly tight gathers that are in the bodice, the sleeves, and the skirt, and that would be very difficult to do with a fabric that was too thick. I believe these stripes are called shadow stripes, where the stripe is made by varying thread density or different weave tightness. I'm not sure, but that sounds about right. And that particular part of the fabric I knew would be the hardest to recreate because it is part of the actual weave of the fabric. It's not an added-on design. So when I was searching for fabrics, I decided that I would prioritize finding a clean white fabric that was fairly translucent in its thinnest parts and had vertical stripes of some kind. This is the fabric that I currently have. It was quite expensive, but it is 100% cotton, and it does seem to have the right kind of shadow stripes. They're more evenly spaced than the original, which has 3 stripes together and then a space and then 3 stripes together. However, I think it will end up creating a similar look. The only problem is it doesn't have the rosebuds. So I'm trying to figure out how I will add those on later, perhaps painting them on by hand, using some sort of stamp or stencil. I'm not quite sure yet, and I'd love to hear your ideas. However, this fabric was one of the first that actually felt translucent enough to be used to create a similar effect. It is still a little too thick, but I think it's the closest we could possibly get. Shortly after I purchased the fabric, I was thoroughly blown away when my grandmother actually sent me the dress to keep and to analyze here at home. This would make this project a lot easier, and I am deeply honored to be given the task of preserving and analyzing this heirloom. So once I had it at home, I spread it out as carefully as I could. The skirt is quite simple. It only has a few panels. The back panel seems to be a perfect rectangle, and the sides and front panel are all sloped a little bit. The skirt has these incredibly dense gathers at the back, and a waistband that has definitely seen better days. The hem is quite interesting as well. Instead of hemming it right at the bottom, there is a little bit of extra cotton added as, I assume, a stiffener to the hem of this gown, and it is done in such a way that you can't see the seam right at the bottom, but instead several inches up you can see the, I assume, machine hemmed top of that cotton stitched through both layers. The bodice is far more complex and is definitely going to take some research. The inside, thankfully, seems to fit perfectly with the Keystone jacket and dress cutter bodice, so I'm very likely going to use that pattern for the lining and main body of the bodice. However, the rest of it is going to prove a bit more of a challenge. I think I found a couple of patterns in some of my books that will make sleeves that are at least relatively similar, so it'll be a good start. But the main problem is the bodice. For some reason, I'm having a very difficult time finding the right pattern with all the right gathers and the yoke that doesn't go all the way to the shoulder, and the collar, which is also slightly puffy. It's not perfectly smooth. When I first saw this, I thought this pattern would be relatively easy to find, since for some reason this design feels very classic of this period. However, I'm not able to find something with this style of yoke in any of the books that I currently have. After I analyzed the dress in its current state, I realized that the bodice especially was far too wrinkled and yellowed for me to feel comfortable handling it enough to be able to copy a pattern from it. So I decided that I would very carefully wash it in some very gentle solutions that are recommended for cotton garments of this era. I soaked both of them for a couple of hours and then rinsed them and then soaked them again. There still is, and always will be, a few bits of discoloration here and there from stains or just from oil and overhandling in some places. However, it is in much better condition than it was, and it's not as crunchy as it had previously felt. After I soaked them, I very gently wrapped it in a towel, pressing it to release as much moisture as I can, and then leaving it out flat to let it dry. For the skirt, I put the front side of it down, since that would be the smoother section, and honestly quite a bit easier to steam later. The back, I laid out as carefully as I could, trying to preserve the gathers so that it would lay nicely and not end up looking as wrinkled as it had before. The bodice, I lay out front side up, and I tried to puff out the sleeves as much as I could to try to remove that crease that was right on the edge. This worked wonderfully, and a few days later I was able to come back and very gently steam it. And then I set the skirt over my dress form. My dress form is far too big to handle this 22-inch waist. However, I was able to drape it gently over the shoulders to let it hang free for a little bit. And the bodice I left on a nice wide wooden hanger. I am still debating as to whether or not I am going to perform any repairs on this dress. While I do see the benefit of just leaving it as is with all of the history intact, I am also making sure that I am documenting all of the damage and any changes that I make. So I am also considering adding a little bit of repairs to some of the worst tears, pretty much all of which are on the waistband. You can see here that there is damage from having it be stretched a little, possibly from stepping on the hem. And this waistband was originally only 2 layers of this very fine cotton dimity, so it wouldn't have been very strong, even when it was first made. At some point, probably right before the wedding in 1979, there was some fusible interfacing added. I can tell it's fusible because it is stuck quite thoroughly onto the back of this fabric. However, there was some damage, probably during the wedding or shortly after, so I would like to be able to repair it just a little bit more, and I'm probably going to do that at some point this next month before I get started on the actual pattern making. This project is a dream come true for me. If you've watched any of my other videos, I'm sure you recognize that this period from about 1895 to 1910 is my favorite in fashion history. I absolutely adore the silhouette and the materials, and I have wanted an excuse for making one of these lingerie or lawn dresses for a long time, but I've never had a good reason to, and now I do. I hope that I can do this dress justice. My next main steps are going to be to figure out what the pattern of the original dress is and how I might need to alter it to fit me. If you have seen my corset video, you'll know I'm about a 27-inch waist when I wear my Edwardian S-bend or straight front corset, and I believe that the timing is just about right that straight front corsets were starting to be seen. It's probably not likely that Alice would have worn a straight front corset in 1897, as I believe the earliest mention of it is in 1896, so it is a little bit early before the French style or straight front corset became popular. However, it did technically exist at this time, so I'm still on the fence as to whether or not I'm going to create a brand new corset for this project. Next month, I hope to have some of the patterns, or possibly all of the patterns, finished and ready to go. I am thinking of using my Drafting Dynamically web app, which if you have not seen the video about that, I'll make sure to link that below. But for now, I just wanted to introduce this beautiful dress, its history, and my excitement for creating a beautiful replica. I hope you enjoy this video, and I will see you next time.